We left off in the last episode at the moment of Yusuf was in the jail with two other prisoners. Meanwhile, the cupbearer, the one who was supposed to remind the king about Prophet Yusuf, forgot him. He became absorbed. And here is a new lesson. No one will ever be as kind to you or remember you in both good times and bad as our Lord does. Never reach out to someone, beg, or ask anything from anyone. And if you must ask, do it with honor and dignity. Be certain that nothing will happen for you except by His permission. If our Lord makes it easy, it will come to pass. But if He withholds it, no one else can override that. So, before you ask anything of people, ask the Lord of mankind, implore Him, and say, O Lord. Then He will have people at your service, and every door will open for you without even having to knock. In fact, one night the king dreamt. He saw 7 fat cows being devoured by 7 lean cows, the fat ones healthy and thriving. When the king awoke, he summoned his provision officers and advisors, saying, I saw in my dream. What do you make of it? Here we see the ancient Egyptians' fascination with dream interpretation. The king was very eager to know the meaning of his vision, but his ministers could not interpret it. They dismissed it as mere babbled, jointed dreams with no meaning. At that moment, the cupbearer, who had been in prison with Yusuf for years, remembered him. He said to the king, I have someone who can interpret your dream, my master. The king replied, Quickly, bring him to me. So the cupbearer went down to the prison, stood before Yusuf's cell, and called him by the name he was known by among the prisoners, Yusuf. O dear friend, the truthful and gentle Yusuf, just so his dignity would be recognized. Without hesitation, Yusuf interpreted the king's dream, telling him that he was the one who had brought glad tidings of his eventual release from prison. It was as if Yusuf had been entirely forgotten in captivity until this moment. This happened because Yusuf had learned his lesson. He realized that everything concerning his fate was in our Lord's hands. Our Lord is the one who made the cupbearer forget, and He is the one who inspired the king's dream, not only so that the king would remember Yusuf, but because the king needed him. Then Yusuf told his companions that the country would experience 7 years of severe famine, followed immediately by 7 years of prosperity. But did Yusuf settle for that answer? Of course not. Yusuf then explained the remedy. If you wish our Lord to save you from those 7 lean years, you must leave the grain bundled and only extract what you need. But why keep it bundled? Yusuf answered, so that its goodness remains intact and touched by thieves, not devoured by mills, and unsullied by insects. Even this explanation was not enough for Yusuf. He also gave them glad tidings that were not already part of the king's dream, explaining further that after the lean years, a year would come in which the people would be helped, when the grain would be pressed so that good would return and people would eat, drink, and be joyful. What did the cupbearer do then? He hastily returned to the king, reciting the dream's interpretation and the remedy, along with the glad tidings, though without mentioning that it was all revealed through the words of Yusuf. The king, utterly impressed by the interpretation and the solution, immediately asked the cupbearer, who interpreted this dream. And without delay, the cupbearer said, It was Yusuf, my master. 2 important questions arise here. Why did the cupbearer not mention from the beginning that he would ask Yusuf? And why did our Lord leave Yusuf in prison and cause the cupbearer to forget to bring up his plight? The answer is that the cupbearer wanted to first astonish the king with Yusuf's abilities before the king directed any questions to him. After the king was impressed by the interpretation, his attitude toward Yusuf would have changed. Indeed, once the king heard the interpretation, he immediately said, Bring him to me. Fetch Yusuf, I want him. But why did our Lord cause the cupbearer not to mention Yusuf earlier? Because our Lord intended to elevate Yusuf's status, to raise him in rank. And here's the important point. Instead of being released from prison out of mere pity from the king, Yusuf insisted on being released on the basis of his proven innocence. When the cupbearer returned, Yusuf said, I will not be released, not until the king has investigated my case and cleared me. Only then will I be freed. Yusuf would not accept a release born solely of the king's compassion. He would only be freed by demonstrating his innocence. And indeed, the king complied, gathering the women of the ruling class, beginning with the wife of the Azizan, questioned them until he learned that not only was Yusuf entirely innocent of false accusations, but even the wife of the Aziz confessed her fault and repented for her old sin. Thus, Yusuf was not only released with honor, but he was also raised to be the man closest to the king. The king said, "Bring him to me, for I intend to have him serve me." When he spoke to Yusuf, he said, "Today, you are the trusted one among us. From now on, you will wield authority like no one before you." Yusuf's status in the kingdom rose quickly. He became second only to the king after, having been nothing more than a prisoner, a slave traded in the black markets, and a castaway child thrown into a well with no power whatsoever. This is all due to his constant supplication. Every time Yusuf raised his hand to his Lord, our Lord would increase his blessings, rescue him, and raise his stature. But every time he reached out to people for help, difficulties only multiplied, and his imprisonment grew longer. Eventually, Yusuf was appointed over the storehouses of Egypt, the greatest storehouses on earth. That is why our Lord describes them in the Quran as the storehouses of the earth. When the king asked Yusuf what position he desired, he said, "Place me in charge of the storehouses of the earth, so that I may safeguard them." You might think Yusuf requested this post out of greed, but in truth, he knew he was choosing a task that could either ruin him or secure his future, because he alone knew the severity of the coming lean years for the country. If he wanted a position free of turmoil, he could have chosen any post in the royal court to ease his mind. Yet he chose the responsibility of the storehouses in order to implement the remedy and the glad tidings revealed to him by our Lord, and that is exactly what happened. Yusuf himself oversaw every sack of grain, both the freshly produced and the stored, so meticulously that Egypt not only fed its own people during the widespread famine in the surrounding lands, but also supplied food and drink to neighboring countries at low prices. Now, you might ask, does that sound ideal? I would say it does not, because as soon as people entered the market, Yusuf was present, watching everything closely to ensure no one stole, no one raised prices, and no one took more than what was fair. What happened was that Yusuf knew them well, even though they had once thrown him into the well when he was a small child. Now, he had grown into a man. Their features might not have changed, but his had. He remembered them well, called them together, and asked them, "What do you want?" They replied with their demands, and Yusuf said, "What you ask for is more than you deserve." He made sure everyone would receive his due portion from the food, distributing it based on the number of people. For example, each person might get a bag of sugar, a bag of rice, a bag of wheat, etc. Yet, his brothers insisted on 2 extra portions, saying, "Our father is too old to come ourselves, and our youngest, who works for us, cannot come either." So Yusuf said, "All right, I will give you your share this time, but on the condition that next time you bring your younger brother along, so I can verify your sincerity. If you do not bring your younger brother, you will not receive any food from me. Look for food in another country." Of course, Yusuf's brothers began to worry, because they knew their father would never allow their younger brother to be sent away given what had happened to Yusuf in the past. Recall, their father, Prophet Yusuf, had not forgotten what was done to Yusuf. And who is the younger brother? It is Benjamin, the one brother, born of the same mother, while Yusuf had 10 other brothers from another wife. We covered the first part of Yusuf's story in detail in the previous episode, The Mistake of Yusuf. You can watch that episode if you wish to know his complete story from beginning to end. Now, Yusuf wanted to see his brother Benjamin, especially because Benjamin was the only one he truly loved, the only one whose heart remained uncorrupted by Satan, unlike that of his other brothers. Then his brothers said, "All right, we will try with our father, because maybe he will agree to send our younger brother with us." Yusuf replied, "By Allah, he will agree." They said, "Then do it, send your younger brother with us." But they could not, for Yusuf insisted that without him they would receive no food. Soon, Yusuf's stature and authority were such that he made sure they returned the money that had been kept in their bags, so that when they went home they would find the funds and then be able to purchase food again without waiting for months. And as soon as they returned, they informed Prophet Yusuf of what had happened and told him that they had even found the money for the food. They then brought Benjamin along so that the Egyptian official could verify their words and let them buy food once more. At this point, Yusuf's brothers began to weep. Their father, Prophet Yusuf, wept so much his eyes nearly filled with tears, and his sight dimmed from sorrow because of his grief over Yusuf and his fear for Benjamin, that he might suffer the same fate as Yusuf did years ago. Yet, Prophet Yusuf, overwhelmed by sorrow, decided to overcome his grief through prayer and supplication. He performed ablution, prayed to eunuchs, and implored, "O Lord, O my Lord, the solution is with you. I am but a servant, and you are the Lord of mankind. I am weak, and you are strong. Restore my children to me." And while he was still on his prayer mat, our Lord answered his prayer. "Rejoice, for your children shall return to you." Although his children did not fully believe him at first, they obeyed his command and began the search for their missing kin in Egypt, knowing that their younger brother Benjamin was there. When they eventually returned with Benjamin, they sought to find Yusuf. When Yusuf's brothers went to their father, Prophet Yusuf, in Egypt without Benjamin, he recalled that they had come without him and began weeping uncontrollably, until his eyes grew heavy with tears from sorrow. Then Prophet Yusuf, in his anguish, decided that the only solution lay in turning to our Lord. He arose, performed ablution, prayed to eunuchs, and cried out, "O Lord, the solution is with you. I am but a servant, you are the Lord of mankind. I am weak, and you are strong. Bring my children back to me." And our Lord answered, "Rejoice, for your children will return to you." Even though his children were not fully convinced by his words, they obeyed him and started their search for Benjamin in Egypt. When they finally returned and encountered Yusuf, who by now had become the powerful Aziz of Egypt, he personally said, "O my dear ones, we have suffered so much. Bring us the food you desire, and leave your brother safely with me, so that while I attend to food distribution, he remains under my custody." Later, Yusuf withdrew his brothers except Benjamin and revealed his identity to them, saying, "I am your brother. Do not be disheartened by what your other brothers have done." And he urged them not to resent what had befallen him. Their father, Prophet Yusuf, then said, "Take this shirt of mine and hold it as proof until you all return safely, and let it be a sign." He added that they should remain steadfast as he entrusted them to Allah. From here, the story continues explaining how Prophet Yusuf, later known as Yusuf al-Siddiq, the Gentle, managed affairs in Egypt, even though his brothers accused him twice of theft. First, because when he was a child, he was forced to remove and break idols, an act that was not actually theft, but a forced repudiation of idolatry. And second, because his paternal aunt, moved by her own desires, falsely accused him. The entire series of events was intertwined with divine wisdom. Yusuf's story shows that whenever we face hardships or are tempted to rely on human intervention, we should instead rely solely on Allah, the Lord of all mankind. Only He can truly deliver our needs. When we call upon Him sincerely, He opens doors for us that no one else can. In the end, despite all the trials, being thrown into a well as a child, being sold into slavery, being falsely accused, and even being imprisoned, Yusuf's steadfast faith, his reliance on Allah, and his unwavering commitment to righteousness not only saw him exonerated, but also elevated him to a position of immense power. As he managed the storehouses of Egypt, his story is a timeless lesson. Whatever trials we face, let us first turn to our Lord, for when we do, Allah will never let our pleas go unanswered. May our Lord have mercy on Prophet Yusuf, on Prophet Yusuf, on all the prophets and messengers combined. O Allah, gather us with them in the highest place, and grant us wisdom, grace, and an unmatched honor that you bestow upon none but your chosen servants.